right? But I want to buy whatever. I want to buy Atom. I want to buy other coins that are not there. I want to buy ADA. So that's why Binance has all of those coins in one place. Kraken, not as many, but Kraken is probably more secure, right? So you have different trade-offs. And that's why I think we're still in a transition phase also within crypto, from those crypto banks, which are centralized exchanges, to the decentralized exchanges and self-custody. And I think that's one reason why I also want to like become a big, like, I want to increase my audience on YouTube. I want to push out more content because I want to raise awareness of that. Most people don't do that. They hold their coins on exchanges and think they're in crypto now, but you're not actually in crypto. If you
Education is the biggest hurdle to adoption for us, I think. I think you touched on something important there, Pseudo, too. I think meme coins have the potential to break down these barriers more than anything else. I mean, if Doge or something can put out an application that is easy to use and intuitive for the average person, who probably, and the average people, most people know what Doge is. I wouldn't be surprised if more people know what Doge is than they know what Bitcoin is. And if we're able to create an application that simplifies the process within Doge, that will be a game changer. I think we spoke about it a little bit last week, in that it's just such a nice, easy, simple jumping off point, and for cryptocurrency and memes.
I agree.
Yeah,
I'm not a bit. I mean, I'm not personally a fan of meme coins, but I think if you look at the mouth of the funnel, if it's what brings people in, and they may all get wrecked, but at least they're kind of exposed in some way, shape, or form, and in that's a baby step into the ecosystem. And I mean, whatever it takes. I mean, I think we all have gotten personally wrecked in some way, shape, or form. I feel like that's sort of a rite of passage when you get into the space. I mean, you don't want it to be, but it just because it's so new. Like you said, you only need to lose your keys once before you kind of learn. So I think you have to sort of learn by bumps and bruises.
And I think it's also interesting, like that thought. I haven't actually thought about it, but now that I think about it, I have so many people that are not in crypto, but they started to buy crypto like a couple of weeks ago, right? And they started off with baby Doge and mini Shiba Inu, right? And with those coins, I don't even know where they find these coins and how they hear about them, but they all have MetaMask connected to PancakeSwap, and they're farming whatever. I'm like, Jesus, how do you even find that? I don't even know about this, but they are fully decentralized, right? I mean, at least that's a positive side effect. People getting familiar with MetaMask, right? And how to add, for example, Binance Smart Chain into your MetaMask, right? Because you have to actually find the RPC key for it and add it manually, right? So that's actually a cool side effect. But I mean, I think the most, like Elon was saying, that what he said, the most entertaining outcome is the most likely.
Yeah.
And if this coins are our killer application to onboard users to decentralized finance and decentralized.
Well, and
why not?
And I think that's actually a good segue into the meaty topic of tonight, which we've been sort of steering towards slowly, which is really what we try to do. I think when we sort of set out with our project, CDs, I think was really just kind of a brand play, play on words in a way that could anchor something very abstract, as it is. I mean, derivatives. I keep telling everybody that, like, I'm sort of the hype guy, marketing guy, creative guy, whatever you want to call it. And I knew, like, I'm like, what are derivatives again? And I'm like, okay, well, if we're gonna get people into this space, I mean, look, we're not necessarily targeting noobs, but I think ultimately you need to bring something down to earth that people can plug into and relate to. And I think that's sort of where we started with the project that has since evolved into these very avatars that you see in front of you now. And I did a sort of like a hello world video today because earlier or late, I guess over the weekend, Chapa and I, we've been trying to figure out, okay, how do we sort of get relevant? In this space, as we know, it's very, very noisy, and you want to make things fun but accessible, right? Something that will be interesting, something will engage, something that especially in this space, because it is so abstract, how do we lower that barrier to entry? So, you know, the idea really behind CDs was, okay, how do we, you know, I think initially we were talking about memes and, you know, stuff that can communicate very easily. And then once we sort of address this idea of, hey, let's go sort of down this it wasn't even anonymous. Like we weren't purposely being anonymous, but we just, it's like, well, like none of us has any notoriety. None of us are Vitalik. None of us are Charles Hoskins, and no, we don't have any notoriety. So we're like, okay, well, let's have some fun with this. And so we really came up with this concept of being pseudonymous. And I had latched onto that because of the, you know, my sort of deep dive, you know, for the last couple of years, actually a year and a half, I've been following Balaji, but, you know, this had popped up in other spheres, but I think he's really the one that's really lifted it on a sort of on a platform. And so we jumped in his feed. I jumped in his feed. I think, you know, Choppa did. And Balaji not only followed, but he quote retweeted. And I was like, oh shit, that's awesome. You know, because he, you know, he's just absolutely a very, very bright person. And he's known for his prescience, being in this space, you know, that he has these, I think he has a biotech background. In fact, that's how I followed him, was when this whole COVID thing popped out. He was one of sort of the key opinion leaders around, hey, look, this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And then sort of went down the rabbit hole and followed him since then. So we got a little bit of exposure out of that, and that's I don't know, just it's exciting, you know, to I guess get some visibility, and you know, really I think validate what we're trying to do, right? Which is, again, I think it's having fun, like the initial, again, you know, this novelty angle, but also having a real use case, right? Ultimately, the novelty lasts for about 5 minutes, but how do we drive use case behind what we're doing? So the whole pseudonymous nature, and I think we should dive into what that means. And with that, why, you know, pseudonyms have been around for ages, and maybe just dig a little bit into the history and then how we are where we are and where the future is going, and you know, how are we going to be playing a role in that space? DJ Chop, I'll let you have some commentary on that.
Yeah, please. So I think one of the more interesting debates through history has been whether or not Shakespeare is actually William Shakespeare.
Right.
That has been going on for ages, and in all honesty, it'll probably never be solved. But I mean, just that idea alone, the pseudonymity behind that, and the idea that he may not actually be who he says he is, or he may have been built up to be somebody who he doesn't say who he is not, adds a whole other dimension to the story, and a whole other dimension to the stories that he's told. And I think the mystique that you can build up around that then has a lot of value in bringing people in and driving interest into the ideas that are behind those stories. I think that can be applied across the board to a lot of different things.
Well, and it can. And sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think a big reason for Bitcoin's success is anchored in the same sort of idea. You can't tie it to any one person. So you can't say this person has created a currency that has the potential to usurp governments and overthrow traditional power structures and everything. You can't haul them into the Senate estimates hearing and say, all right, dude, why have you done this? This is a threat to global power structures and stability and the way things work. We're going to have to shut you down. The idea that it's anonymous, it can't be tied to any one person, and that it more or less has a life of its own that's not anchored in the natural world, is really, really, really powerful for seeding ideas in people's minds. I really don't think Bitcoin would be anywhere near as successful as it is if it had been tied to a single person in the way that lots of other things are. It's a really, really powerful idea. Excuse me.
I think in contrast to that, look at Cardano, right? Cardano is a very successful project, if we want it or not. I actually like ADA. I hold ADA since years, and I think the project is great. But I also understand that people limit Cardano to the way Charles Hoskinson speaks, right? And he's in his own world, right? He's kind of a bit of a weirdo, maybe a genius at the same time. He's like in his early 30s, looks like 50. I understand that. But the thing is, like, people, like, they got so much hate simply because many people affiliate Cardano. Like, the first thing that comes into their mind is like, oh, Charles Hoskinson, right? And here's weird, I don't like Cardano. So I think that's like an instant kind of like negative affiliation that you have with the product. And I would say the same, like we were just saying, right? The biggest plus for Bitcoin is that nobody knows who Satoshi is. Even though he was around, he was responding a lot of like emails. He was still active in the first year and a half. But if he would be still around today, let's say Satoshi is cracked, right? How many Bitcoiners, OG Bitcoiners, they're like, oh my God, Bitcoin is the future. It's the next global reserve currency. How many of them would say, oh, I hate Bitcoin now, right? Simply because Craig Wright is an absolute weirdo, right? He's like, Charles is here and Craig Wright is here. You can't even listen to this guy sometimes because he's so deep in his own thoughts. And maybe he's a genius, right? Maybe he's not even a bad guy. Maybe he's a genius. I don't know. But if he would one day sign a Satoshi transaction and prove that he is Satoshi, that would probably have a very negative side effect for Bitcoin itself, because then you have a face, you have somebody, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Many hate him. So that's the thing, right? And I think for Bitcoin, it would actually be very good if Satoshi would never even ever come out.
I agree. It's really hard to divorce the brand from the technology or the product in that way. Like exactly as you said, if you say Cardano, immediately people think of Charles Hoskinson. In the same way you say Tesla, everybody's like, yes, Elon Musk, of course. Whereas Bitcoin is an idea in and of itself, and you mentioned Bitcoin and there's no other parallels to draw from. It's just Bitcoin is, and I think there's a lot of power to that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think let's be clear here, because I look, Satoshi is arguably that is a pseudonym, right? So I think there is debate whether it's a person or people. But look, I mean, again, just explaining the usefulness and the fact, the historical references of why it's been used and why it's continued. In fact, we're now finding an increased widening use case of it for many reasons. And I think that's the exploratory part. That's the experimental part, because the technology now is enabling it in new ways. So, I mean, the use case before with, William Shakespeare in history, a lot of authors had, it's known, I think, in that industry to use pseudonyms for various reasons. One, just to maintain privacy. Two, I think they would speculate with William Shakespeare that maybe he didn't have a pedigree or the background, and therefore maybe wouldn't have been taken seriously as a writer. But I mean, you can only speculate why. So there's different reasons, and I mean there are certainly nefarious use cases for pseudonymity, but I think there's probably more use cases outside of that than not. And I think that's kind of where, fast forward to today, in the sort of peak woke culture, where you really have a very hyper-polarized environment where you can't say anything without fear of being canceled. It will absolutely wreck your livelihood. And the sad thing is you can't, it's the thing that we need most. We need deep honesty with each other. Otherwise, I think we're in deep peril as a society. So I think that's really, philosophically, look, setting aside everything else, philosophically, we need to be able to speak as openly as possible. And I think until we maybe even go to the other side of that, I think this is a very clear use case for what we're doing. I mean, we're doing it for fun. I mean, if anybody really wanted to dox us, they could probably figure out a way. But I think, again, I think it's, you could. Well, well, that's actually a bigger point too, because we're not truly pseudonymous, like really, if you wanted to, and I think this is where we'd like to evolve what we're doing, is that you can plug into whatever we're doing. You come in through a gateway where we have no way of knowing who you are, but you're then able to create an identity via, I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to put together now. So, I mean, that again, that goes to the tech side of things. But again, the use case, I think the use case is established. And I think there's two sides of it. One, I think we touched on this last time, Cryptocito is one, we were talking about privacy, we were talking about security, but I would also see, an exploratory aspect. I think DJ Choppa, you related to me that you may not be as confident, without, so the avatar. And I think this allows us to kind of create, to explore sort of whether it's personas or a voice or, different vocation. It's such a wide and spanning canvas. And that's what's exciting. Outside, I mean, so many different reasons, and they're so personal, deeply personal, but I think that's really and again, it's already, I was reading some of his more recent content on the topic on Balaji's, because he's been talking about this for some time now, that it is already mainstream, but now I think we're having that where the technology is starting to merge, that it will proliferate in a meaningful way that we can also transact pseudonymously, and that's a big one. Yeah.
I think it evens the playing field. It removes biases that people might have in meeting people. Just straight away removes any biases, and it allows people to engage on the same level with anyone, which sadly isn't possible in the real world at the moment, and probably never will be, just because of our innate, inherent human biases that we all have. I think that's really exciting, and hopefully it means that all of the best ideas are able to float to the top because they are genuinely the best ideas, rather than having them being promoted by somebody who's got this established brand that everybody understands, and this is a smart person, of course this must be a great idea because they put it forward. Whereas if it's pseudonymous, people will latch on to a good idea regardless of who's putting it forward, and push it to the top. I think that's really cool. A level playing field is, as you say, Liquid, something that is sorely needed in us being able to converse and transact with ideas, which the world sorely needs at the moment, I think.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you have to build up that reputation and credibility, right? Take Polkadot, for example. Polkadot is a huge success because of Gavin Wood, right? Gavin Wood wrote the Ethereum yellow paper. He invented the Ethereum virtual machine. Like, this guy knows his shit, definitely, right? If he chose to, if he would have said, no, I don't want to be like the face of Polkadot, I still work on it, but I don't want anybody to know, I don't think Polkadot would have been such a big success, just because people immediately give credibility to the entire project because of him. So if you choose to be kind of pseudonymous, and I'm to some degree, right? I mean, everybody calls me Cryptocito in the crypto world, right? Nobody calls me by my first name. But I think you have to build up that reputation and credibility initially, right? And it takes time, obviously. So that's probably one downside of it. But as you said,
that's actually, but that's maybe that's even a topic worth digging into a little bit. So mathematically, this is where the technology can come into play. Okay, this is where blockchain actually can bring in. So when you talk about like zero knowledge proofs, right, which is being able to verify something without actually knowing what that something is, and I think this is Balaji was actually going through the maths of this, because it is pretty high level, that you can actually transfer that credibility through. So I think he had sort of an XY axis, and sort of when we should almost pull it up. We need to get fancy with we need to have like little pop-ups and stuff that we can talk through. But basically, there is a way to transfer technologically basically a point system up to a certain degree, because there's a trade-off. The more reputation you transfer over from whatever that other one, then you might be more identifiable as that person that transferred that reputation. But there is a way to transfer some of it to where you're not starting from cold, not from scratch, right? So that, I think, would go back to your earlier point about like, hey, we're starting a new project. And it's like, well, who's this character? And I think the best analog right now would be something like karma on Reddit, right? So you're able to build up karma points, based on how long you were there and your contribution, blah, blah, blah. You would then be able to transfer that thing, these non-fungible assets. You can then, I think, convert them in some way over to a new identity that, I guess, some fungible aspects. I'm probably talking out of my ass now because I'm trying to articulate, but basically it's a way to transfer some of that reputation in a way that doesn't identify you, right? Whether it was from another pseudonym or from your real person, your real persona. So I think that's technologically possible. I think that's kind of where we're starting to touch the edges, and I think that's what's going to accelerate over time. And he's even given some soft timelines on how fast it'll happen, whether in the next 5, 10, 20 years, where this will be completely proliferated. But yeah, so it's possible.
And I think the crypto industry is the perfect playground for that, because it's so brand new and there's so much innovation going on, right? So it's basically a space where the more people join and innovate with us and build with us, better, right? Even content creators. I mean, some content creators are completely like, they don't show their face. They're even either on Twitter or even on YouTube, right? And I think crypto is native to that ideology, probably, right? That I rather want to judge you by your reputation that you build up in the industry, by your knowledge, by what you say, what you do, and not by who you are, right? So I think that's pretty powerful. But at the same time, there's also, I think, this very thin line where it goes from pseudonymity to anonymity. And we've seen this anonymity aspect being exploited over and over again, right? So people just push out these protocols, like we were saying in the beginning, right, with high farms, and especially now in DeFi, and they choose to remain anonymous. Some cases even pseudonymous, like we've seen with Sushi, right? They forked Ethereum, they forked Uniswap, packed a token to it, had a huge success with this yield farming concept, and then a week later, the core developers like, oh, hey guys, I'm taking all the dev funds now. See you when I see you, right? So it's kind of enough. He came back, he routed back. It's kind of like, I think Alameda jumped in and saved this situation for whatever reason. Till to date, I don't know why he did that, but it also shows like how dangerous it is, because if you don't know who you're interacting with, there's no like way that you can hold them accountable. And that's kind of the risk, especially in an industry where moving money and moving also the custody of the money that we hold is kind of like the daily bread here, right? So that's the kind of danger in that industry. But I think it all has pros and cons, right? We've seen people being like the BitMEX guy. He was fully public. Still wrecked his own users, so it's like, oh, if you're not going 10x long here, you're stupid, right? And then everybody goes long and gets liquidated. So even if you're public, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're acting in goodwill. But yeah, I don't know, just some thoughts here. I don't know, even like,
well,
yeah,
no, I mean, I think, look, you're right, but I think is that less about whether anonymous or pseudonymous, or as you said, you can be fully out, with your face and still wreck people. I think that's just about mitigating for whatever your risk exposure is to any of these. I mean, crypto is highly risky in any shape or form anyway, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about contract risk. You're talking about whether it's somebody has malintent, to rug pull, whatever. So I mean, I think you're dealing with a host of variables, and then because this space is so new, we still haven't figured out, or we're still figuring out how to mitigate for some of those things that are going to happen. I mean, it's almost like you need to parse these things. For me, the pseudonymous thing is kind of it's philosophical. I think that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think now, look, it is already possible. If we really, like, if we didn't, like I said, if anybody really wanted to, it wouldn't take that. It wouldn't be that hard to figure out who we are. But I think really as an establishing a use case and really building off the back of this, in a meaningful way. Like, I mean, it's got to be fun first, and then because I think that's kind of what keeps us involved. But long term, it's gotta have a real tangible and useful application. And I think it does. I really do think it. I think it does. We've already established that. Especially now, because we are up. We're talking about all these numbers going up and down, and it's from a personal point of view, whether you're at risk, for somebody jacking you for your coins or whatever, or you become subject to some central authority because. Again, it is so many. There's so many reasons why you can't. Yeah,